Hi and welcome to episode 26 of the Fat Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Asher Lamy, and that's probably one of the best intros I've ever done. It feels very much like I'm in control. Appearances can be deceiving. I'm not. It's Tuesday evening. This podcast is supposed to be launched Wednesday morning. It's all very lastminute.com. Some housekeeping, if you will. First of all, if you hear like a very loud noise that sounds like someone's being murdered, don't panic. Murder is not occurring. It's just my kids. It's summer holidays and they're on the PlayStation. So you never know what could happen. Loud noise is very, very common. Also, this is going to be a quick one. It's going to be a quick one for a lot of reasons. Number one, because it's very last minute. Number two, because it's very hot and I'm having hot flushes and I can't have a fan on because that would ruin the recording, and I don't have air conditioning. I live in Scotland, so I don't want to expire from sweating. So there's only so much I can do today. Also, because this is going to be a quick one anyway, I had an idea for what I wanted to do. I think it's going to be magical. I think it's going to really appeal to those of you who, like me, are a little bit neurospicy, a bit neurodivergent, and love to understand things. Like if you really want to understand something, you know, when you're just like, why does that happen? I'm going to explain it today. And that's what I'm going to do. So it might be a quick one. I'm not going to do any more than needs to be done. So hopefully we'll get you out of here soon. If you don't like to understand how things work, I'm just going to warn you right now, I'll be using big words just because I like to use them and because I like to understand how things work. So prepare yourself for that. So hot flushes, children trying to murder people on the PlayStation, very last minute. Prepare yourself for the whirlwind. That is episode 26, season 4 of Fat Doctor podcast. I wanted to do this because I often find with clients that they will ask me questions and I want to explain in great detail the answer to their questions. But because I find myself doing it over and over again, I figured, why don't I just record a podcast and then next time they ask me, I'll be like, oh, I've got you. And then I'll just send them the link to the podcast. Because today I want to talk about why stress impacts our body and how it impacts our body. And these are the kind of questions that I get. Why is it when I'm stressed, my pain levels go up? Why is it when I'm stressed, my blood sugar goes up? Why, when I'm stressed, does it mess with my periods? How come stress causes me to feel so exhausted and fatigued and unwell? Why does stress cause migraines? Why does stress cause my autoimmune condition to get worse? Like, how can stress have such an impact on the body? That's the question that I'm going to try and answer today. And to begin with, I want to talk about what the term stress, which gets used in a lot of different ways. And today I'm going to be talking about it in a very kind of like medical, pathological way. When I talk about stress, I'm actually going to be talking about a stressor, stressor, a stressor. And what is a stressor? Well, that's anything that the brain interprets as a threat to your well-being. That's a stressor. All right? In the context of this podcast. So when I'm just out of panic. Am I recording? Yeah, I am. Calm down, Ash. That's what happens when it's lastminute.com. It's all right, I'm recording. This is all fine. Video's on. It's fine. That was a stressor. You see, what's happening is I'm sat here, I'm looking and I'm listening, and all of my senses are producing information that is processed by my brain. In particular, part of my brain that I'm talking about today is the amygdala. Amygdala. Yeah, that's my first big word. There'll be more. If you're into drinking games, it could be a fun drinking game, like every time Asher uses a big word. But anyway, I'm not going to recommend binge drinking. So maybe don't do that. Maybe just do like a hypothetical kind of metaphorical shot, not an actual shot. But yeah, amygdala. The amygdala, which is in the brain, it's constantly processing all of this information and it's detecting threats. All right, a threat. That's a stressor, a threat. And if it detects a threat, it immediately tells the hypothalamus, that's another part of the brain, the hypothalamus, it says threat alert. Think of the amygdala, you know the DEFCON system in the US, which I always find really weird because DEFCON 1 is like the biggest threat and DEFCON 5 is like the least threat. But think of it a bit like that. It's constantly like assessing the threat level. And if the threat level goes up, it speaks to the hypothalamus and it says, hypothalamus, danger. And the hypothalamus goes, got it, boss. And it activates the sympathetic nervous system. Now, I learned about the sympathetic nervous system when I was quite young, and at no point in time did it cross my mind to ask, why do we call it the sympathetic nervous system? It's not very sympathetic. I would argue it's quite mean sometimes. So why do we call it that? I don't know the answer. Don't ask me because I don't know. If you want to look it up, find out, let me know. Great, because I'd love to know, but I don't know why it's called that. It's just, it is. So there's the sympathetic nervous system, and it's like polar opposite, if you will, the parasympathetic nervous system. There you go. And these two kind of are never working at the same time. It's either one or the other that's activated. And this is responsible, it's part of what we call the autonomic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that is doing anything without any conscious thought. Like our heart is beating, our lungs are working, our blood is pumping, our kidneys are working, our livers, all of that. We're not thinking about it. It's just happening. And that's because it's controlled by a part of our nervous system that is, it's nothing to do with like higher functioning. So it's called the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system has all sorts of impacts on our body. So it increases our heart rate. So the minute the sympathetic nervous system is switched on or stimulated, boom, heart rate increases. Respiratory rate, our breathing rate increases. Blood pressure goes up. Muscles become tense. You start to try and cool your body temperature by sweating. Various other processes, but those are like big ones. Like you become much more aware, so your vision improves. All of these things are to help us to deal with a threat. Because we've talked about how do we deal with threats, fight or flight or freeze or flop or form, but whatever, it's preparing us to deal with the threat. So if you imagine like, an animal in the savannah, all of a sudden a predator comes along, they suddenly sense, oh, something's not right. They've picked it up in the corner of their eye or whatever. Immediately, heart rate goes up, breathing rate goes up. They're getting ready, probably in most cases, to run for their lives. So you need your muscles to be prepared, right? You need all sorts of, you need to be ready. You need a body to be ready. But when I say like, oops, I didn't turn my phone off, never mind. When I say raised heart rate, increased breathing, raised blood pressure, sweating, what else did I say? Yeah, like things like that. What do you think of? What first comes to your mind? Because for me, it's panic attack. Like I think of panic. And that's exactly what a panic attack is. A panic attack is when the sympathetic nervous system gets stimulated, and some people say inappropriately. I wouldn't say inappropriately. I don't like the word inappropriately. Maybe I need to turn my phone off. I wouldn't say inappropriately, but I would say it happens inconveniently. You have not actually been faced with a bear. You do not need to run from said bear. So like your body is doing what your body needs to do, but there's no outlet because you can't run. You're not going to run. You're not going to fight because it's kind of inconvenient. It's not inappropriate, but it's inconvenient. And so then you have all of this kind of like, you're breathing fast, your blood pressure's gone up, your heart's beating fast, but you're just standing there. And so you develop what we describe as a panic attack. And they're horrible. When you start breathing really, really fast, you're taking on too much oxygen. Now, if you're running, that's great. But if you're not running, too much oxygen actually makes you feel really sick. It makes you feel like you're dying. It makes you feel like you can't breathe. So all of these things is just stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. Next time you feel like you're having a panic attack, stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, that's all it is. It's not all it is, it's horrendous, but that's the physiology behind it. But I wasn't here to talk about panic. I talked about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus switches on the sympathetic nervous system, but also releases a hormone. And the hormone is picked up. The hormone is called CRA. We're not getting too into it. Like, it's rein it in, Asher. I'm reining it in. I don't want you to drink too many metaphorical shots, hypothetical shots. It's too much. I won't tell you what the name of the hormone is, but it basically tells another part of the brain, the pituitary gland, to release a hormone called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Oh, it's getting a lot. So amygdala tells the hypothalamus, who tells the pituitary gland to release a hormone that tells the adrenal glands. Now, everything so far has been in the brain. The adrenal glands sit above the kidneys, so they're like in the body. So the message gets to the adrenal glands. You need to start releasing some hormones. And two of those hormones are adrenaline and noradrenaline. And you, I'm sure, have heard of adrenaline and noradrenaline. They act on the sympathetic nerves. But it also tells the adrenal glands to release what we call glucocorticoids in steroids, another way of calling them steroid hormones, including one called cortisol, which many of you will have heard of, cortisol, this hormone. Now, cortisol plays a very, very important role in the stress response, all right? So your amygdala told your hypothalamus, which told your pituitary gland, which told your adrenal glands, release some cortisol. And cortisol comes along and it's here to basically maintain your, what's the exact term that I wrote down in my notes? Have a look here. Cortisol. Oh, I can't find it now. Cortisol helps maintain the body's heightened state of alertness and energy supply. All right, heightened state of alertness and energy supply. Now, the energy supply is important because energy comes in the form of glucose, right? Now, if you happen to be eating when you come across a bear, then you will have a source of energy, and that would be great. But for the most part, like that's, we can't rely on that. So it's all right. The body has it covered. The liver can produce energy in the form of glucose in an emergency. It's prepared, and the cortisol is what tells the liver, make some. We need some immediately. Make it. So the liver's like, I got you, boss, and that's what the liver does. What else does cortisol do? Cortisol also suppresses the kind of what I want to call non-essential body functions. All right. If you are about to run for your life or fight a bear, you do not need to be concerned with digestion, reproduction, growth, all of that stuff. Like it's, not important. And your immune response, like these are all very important things, but not in the moment of stress. Right now, we need all the energy and all the blood flow to be taken away from those organs that are responsible for digestion and reproduction and stuff, and be redistributed to the parts of our body that, we need immediately. And that's all great, right? Like it all works. Our bodies are clever. And then what happens is that you do whatever you're going to do in this stressful situation. So you experience the stressor, you deal with the threat, then you move on. And your cortisol levels are actually like a feedback to the brain. So they tell the brain, hey, cortisol has arrived. I've done my job. And then the brain looks around and says, okay, threat's over. We can relax. And then everything just dies down. The adrenaline gets absorbed, the cortisol gets absorbed, it all falls away. The sympathetic nervous system's like, all right, we've done our job. We'll hand over to our pal, the parasympathetic nervous system, and then you can chill. And again, think of that little animal in the savannah, the impala or whatever. It's seen the threat, it's run from the threat, and once it's safe, it's back chewing the cud, right? It's chewing the grass, doing what it always does, munching away. So that's what's supposed to happen. And that's what our bodies are designed to do. This is, thousands, millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. All right. But life doesn't work that way. We don't come across bears very often. Not the animal kind. If you're queer, maybe you come across more bears, but that's a different kind of bear. Again, rein it in, Asher. You were going to be quick. So we're not coming across bears. And the stressors that we experience on a day-to-day basis are very different to what our ancestors were experiencing. They're much more subtle and they are constant, right? For many of us, they're there all the time. And this is a problem because our body is designed for bursts of cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. That's fine, bursts, but not long-term release. So if you're coming across repeated stressors or the initial stressor is never going away, either way, then you start chronically secreting cortisol, not just like a little dash here and there. It's there all the time. And that becomes a problem, right? Let's go back. Let's let's go back to what we said. I'm going to get my list out again. What does cortisol do? So it messes with the immune system. So that's a start. That's no good, right? Your immune system is there to fight off infection, to fight off inflammation, to fight off malignancy. So you don't want to mess with your immune system in the long term, do you? No, definitely not. Because you're not going to be able to fight off, a bug, or you're not going to be able to heal well or properly. And it can also cause chronic inflammation within the body. And chronic inflammation is really dangerous. It leads to all sorts of long-term medical conditions. So we don't want that. We don't want our immune system to be compromised. And cortisol will do that. What else does cortisol do? Well, remember I said it tells the liver to produce glucose. It wants a constant supply of energy in the blood. Well, again, great if you're in a stressful situation, but not all the time, because if you've got high levels of glucose in the blood all the time, that's not going to bode well for you in terms of insulin resistance and diabetes, right? And also, it's the liver that's doing all of the hard work. So stress can mess with your liver. Who knew? What else did I say cortisol did? Cortisol impacts your growth. It impacts reproduction. So it can actually impact growth, but also growth of the new cells, growth and renewal of cells, which is really important, right? Because our cells are constantly growing and repairing themselves. So that's really important. Reproduction. So don't be surprised if you notice, for example, that your periods are all over the place during a particularly stressful time. Yeah, of course, because the body's basically like, yeah, that's not important. So when people say to me, I missed a period 1 month, I'm like, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are you pregnant? And the second thing you need to ask yourself is, are you stressed? Because those are the two main common causes of missing a period. It messes with your digestion. It does two things. Number one, and this might be a bit gross, but when the sympathetic nervous system switches on, if you have a lot of food lingering around in the digestive system, quite often it'll be like, get rid of it. Which if you're an impala on the savannah and you need to take a quick poop, that's okay. Not great if you're like a human in a boardroom or classroom or shopping centre. Not so much fun. So funny tummy, nervous tummy, anxious tummy, yeah. But in the long term, if it's messing with your digestion, you can imagine all of these things, reflux, IBS, you name it. It's messing with your digestive system in the long term. That's no good. So muscle tension, cortisol strengthens your muscles. And, in a really stressful situation, you can lift things you never thought that you would be able to lift in a stressful situation. But if you're constantly stressed and your muscles are constantly tense, then that can lead to muscle pain, can lead to headaches, it can lead to all sorts of problems, right? Again, no good. But it would explain why you're feeling pain, or why your blood glucose is raised, or why your periods are absent, or why you're not sleeping, or why you're feeling sick. All of these things can be explained purely by high levels of cortisol. So not only can it cause physical symptoms, but it can also cause long-term damage to the body. It can cause long-term damage to the brain. And that, I think, sort of may come as a shock to some of you. All right, so here we go. I'm going to tell you what it does to the brain. There's another part of the brain we haven't mentioned yet. It's called the hippocampus. Now, I love the name hippocampus because hippo... hippo? No? Okay, fine. Hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for memory and for cognitive function. So cortisol has been shown to cause atrophy, which is like wasting of the hippocampus, which is why your memory is impaired and your cognitive function is impaired when you're stressed, because it's messing with the hippocampus. And long term, it can mess with that. And I'm very curious to know whether they are looking into the relationship between stress and things like dementia, long term memory loss. Like I don't know the answers. I've not looked yet, but if you do, again, let me know. And then there's another part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision making. It's responsible for kind of like higher function, big thoughts. And again, it doesn't function as well because of the cortisol. So your executive function is impaired by stress, by chronic stress. And remember the amygdala? Remember I was talking about the amygdala right at the beginning? That's the bit that's like sensing whether or not you're in danger. Well, chronic stress can cause structural changes within the amygdala. Your amygdala changes, physiologically changes after periods of chronic stress, especially if you're experiencing this stress when you're young. And as a result, it becomes hyperactive. And this becomes a vicious cycle because your amygdala is responsible for the stress response, right? It's the first part of the stress response. So if it becomes hyperactive, then you're going to experience more stress and it will become a vicious cycle. It sets up this horrible vicious cycle. So yeah, brain damage, structural brain damage, folks, from chronic stress. No jokes. And also I just want you to think now about how this impacts us beyond the physiological. Like if your threat levels are always high, like you are constantly anxious, you are constantly fearful, you are having panic attacks, you are not sleeping, you are worried all the time, you find it difficult to focus and concentrate, you don't do as well at work, and all of those things increase your stress levels. So it's just this vicious cycle. You're constantly anxious and scared, and you shouldn't be. Nobody should have to feel constantly anxious and scared. And you'll be hypervigilant. As I said, the amygdala has structurally changes. You are constantly looking for the threat. Hypervigilance is a common sort of response to chronic stress and being constantly on edge. And we talked about the parts of your brain that are responsible for executive function and memory and cognition. So of course, if these are being impaired by cortisol, you're going to struggle to do your job or to problem solve or to think outside the box. When sometimes you just become really tunnel visioned, you can't really you're not thinking straight. Maybe even you become clumsy or you can't remember anything. Someone told you something and you just completely forget. You're worrying that you've got dementia. You're sitting there thinking, I think I might have dementia because I can't remember anything. And you're struggling to make decisions, all of that stuff. It's because of the impact of cortisol on your brain. Cortisol keeps you awake, so you don't sleep. And again, if you're about to be mauled by a bear, this is very important. Last thing you want to do is fall asleep. But if you're constantly not sleeping, then that's no good. It's not good for you. And if you're not getting, even if you're sleeping, but you're not getting restful sleep, it can impact proper restful sleep, deep sleep, so that you're constantly you're sleeping, but you're not fully asleep. Because you're constantly hyper aware and hyper aroused and hyper vigilant, I should say. And also, if we are stressed and we struggle to think clearly in executive function and we're constantly fearful and worried and hypervigilant and not sleeping, etc., etc. Of course, we have a very, very low, small buffer. We have a very kind of low threshold. Whenever something happens, and it could be something quite small and potentially insignificant even, it immediately sets us on edge and sets up this kind of stress response. So we find ourselves our moods are swinging. We're very irritable. We call it emotional dysregulation. We can't cope with things because we're in that stressed out state. How many people can relate to this? Long term, this is going to lead to conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, complex PTSD. And I'm not saying these conditions don't exist, they do. But for a lot of people, it is just the chronic stress that's causing these things. And what we should take a moment to think about, what are these stressors, right? What do they look like? Because we don't come into contact with bears anymore. If you've ever been in a really horrible situation, a classic example is a near miss, you almost crash your car, or something sort of big happens and it's really sudden and it's really scary. you will notice that kind of like sudden kind of fear response, and then afterwards your body almost like is full of energy. It's almost, you often find yourself sort of shaking and shivering and just kind of having all of this kind of energy that needs to be released. That's kind of quite an acute, like that's the equivalent of facing a bear, right? But for us, it's much more subtle than that. It's day to day. It's the microaggressions. It's the threat to your well-being. It's knowing that you don't have access to decent healthcare, that you could lose your job, that there are issues with your home or your relationships. It's trauma that you experienced as a kid that you've never been able to process fully. And every time you find yourself in the same situation as you experienced as a child, or even not even the same, in a similar situation, you're quote unquote triggered. But literally what that means is this situation is triggering the stress response. That's not fun. Stressor doesn't even have to be something that you've experienced yourself. It's just the threat. If you belong to a particular group of people that you know are at higher risk, so for example, as a fat person, I know there are certain situations where I'm at risk. And so my stress response is immediately activated, even if I've never personally experienced like the threat. It's just the idea, it's just knowing that the threat exists is enough to stimulate my amygdala. And as I said, if that's something that you've experienced for a very long time, there are structural changes within your amygdala, and all of a sudden now everything is stressful. If you live in a marginalized and oppressed body, this is your reality. This is your day-to-day. And so when people go, oh, you really need to work on your stress. What? Like, cool. How are we going to do that? And let's be real. Until society stops oppressing certain groups of people, large swathes of us are going to be chronically stressed. There are things that you can do to interrupt the kind of what we call the hypothalamic-pituitary axis. There are things you can do. There are ways to switch off the amygdala, to switch off the hypothalamus, to switch off the adrenal glands, to interrupt the process. There are. And I'm not an expert in any of these things. And I am a huge believer in all of these things. Like whatever it is that you're doing, if it's working, do it. But one thing I like to remind people is that the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system do not work together. They can't work together. It's one or the other. And so one thing you can do to help with stress is to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, when I was a young'un in medical school, I remember my physiology tutor like describing it as, imagine a person who's just had a meal and is reading a newspaper. That's the kind of things that you need to, like, that's the state, the height when the parasympathetic nervous system is kind of stimulated. That's what it is. Somebody who's eaten a meal, so it's digestion, it's relaxation, and it's food. It's definitely food. It's eating. Eating is good, but it's joy and it's pleasure. When you're stressed, you don't have time for joy or pleasure because you're in survival mode, right? You're trying to survive. So finding ways to bring joy and pleasure into your life, in as much as you can, is always a good thing. It's one way, it's not the only way, but it's one way to combat the continuous chronic stress response that we're experiencing. Joy and pleasure. When I work with my clients, one of the first questions I ask them is, do you feel safe? I mean, it's not the first question, but I often will ask, do you feel safe? And I think I've mentioned this already. As I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, I'm sure I said this in the last episode. Whoops. And another question I ask is joy and pleasure. What are you doing to pleasure yourself? And yeah, sex, folks. Sex is not is not an essential function. So that's a good one. An orgasm, eating food, or whatever. Pleasure is such a good thing. And I just want to point out how much damage the medical profession is doing to us, because the medical profession, doctors are recommending diets. They cause stress. Starvation causes masses of stress to the body. Huge cortisol response when you starve. They're advising us to constantly check our weight and to be ashamed. They're basically prescribing shame. They're stigmatizing us. They're denying us access to healthcare. All of these things increase like our cortisol levels, which is bad for us. So you got to wonder, like when you go and see a doctor and you're like, my blood glucose is up, and they're like, well, you need to eat less and exercise more. And have you noticed that you're fat? Actually, they're making it worse. When you go and see a doctor and you say, I'm in a lot of pain, and your doctor says, well, deal with it. That's not my problem. Or if you just lost some weight, it wouldn't hurt as much. Or they don't believe you, or they make some horrendous ableist comment that, like, you know, you're thinking about 3 weeks later and you're in your car and you're crying about it and all this. When that happens, your doctor is literally making it worse. They're causing you harm. When you go and see a doctor and you say, I am exhausted all the time, and they're like, work harder, exercise more, be more miserable. They're not helping you. They're making it worse. Really, what you want your doctor to be able to do is be like, tell me, are you feeling stressed? And stress, like I said, it's a very nebulous term, but like, what are your stressors at the moment? List them. And I bet you if you did that right now, if you stopped and just went and just grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and you listed out all the things that were causing you stress at the moment, that feel like a threat to your well-being, you'd realise there was a whole bunch of them. It's tough. It's tough living in this world, especially if you're in a marginalised body. It lasted longer than I thought, but I am close to expiring from perspiration. Hot flushes suck. Hormones suck. But anyway, I hope you found that helpful. I'm sorry if I repeated myself a lot from last week. I don't remember. I recorded those podcasts quite a while ago, and I don't remember what I said. So now I'm like, I might just repeated myself, but that's okay. If I did, well, you're welcome. And if I didn't, I hope you enjoyed it. And next week, I'm going to be talking a bit more about a course that I am in the process of launching. Right, so doors register. You can register your interest now, but doors to registration will open soon, Monday. I think. I'm pretty sure. And a lot of this stuff, like the chronic stress stuff, has informed the course that I've written, the framework that I've developed, and the work that we'll be doing as a group. Because I really just truly believe you have to address the underlying stress levels and the underlying threat first. All the other stuff comes later, but the threat, the danger, the amygdala part is really important. So we will be addressing that in our group calls and in the kind of course material as well. For those of you who don't know, it's a 6-month program. Doors close beginning of August. For now, that might change. Subject to change, folks. T's and C's. But when I close the doors, there'll be only a handful of people. There's only a handful of spaces. It won't work if there's more than 8, maximum 10 people. That's it. And you'll each get a 90-minute one-to-one with me where we get to know each other, where I want to meet you, and I really want to talk to you, and I want to get you ready, and give you the best opportunity to enjoy this course. I think that's one of my kids telling me it's dinner time. Oops. But to enjoy this course, to this program. It's not just a course, it's a program. So you get a 90-minute one-to-one, and you can immediately dive in, if you want, straight into the course material. There are videos, there are all sorts of bits and bobs. I use Thinkific, which is a course platform. So yeah, that's what you get sort of over the month of August. And then in September, we'll start our group calls. They're every 2 weeks. And you get, so what you could do if you wanted, not essential, but you could kind of watch the videos and do the module 1 week. And then the following week, we meet to kind of talk and to discuss and to practice stuff and to problem solve, and you can ask me questions and we get into a really good discussion. So there's a group call once every 2 weeks, and so that will take 4 months, and then at the end we bring it all together and we do like a celebration, because we'll be taking our power back, and by the time we get to the end we'll all be massively empowered. So we'll need to do some kind of celebration. Haven't decided exactly how it's going to work. Depends on where people are in the world. I am quite used to working with people in different time zones, so don't worry about that. If that's something you're worried about, just message me, I'll explain how that works. And then of course there's the community element. I use Discord. It's either Discord or WhatsApp, and Discord is better. And because you don't need your phone number or anything, so we don't have each other's phone numbers. And it's just a messaging kind of app, but also has lots of other amazing features. And so we have a little community that is there for each other. I want to be available to you. I'm not going to say 24/7. 24/7 is asking too much, but I am available for questions, comments at any point in time during the 6 months. You just message through the Discord and we chat. So, yes, a friend of mine told me there's a technical name for that, but I can't remember what it is. My friend Jolie told me. I'll have to ask her. I'll mention it next time. But that's Take Your Power Back in a nutshell. I really love, if you're interested, for you to get in touch and bag a space, yeah. The cost of the course is £980 for the 6 months, and you can pay that over a period of months or upfront if you've got the cash. All right, that's that. See you next week. Hope you enjoyed my little physiology and anatomy and physiology lesson. If you like this kind of podcast, then let me know. Email me, and I'll do more of them. Bye, folks.